Deep within the dim forest, the party makes their way along the path. Frustration is written all over their faces as one of the scouts grumbles about how pointless their entire detour had been. Letting out an exhausted sigh, he closes his eyes in annoyance, venting about the situation and how much time they ended up wasting on that pointless encounter. He claims that if they weren't trying to stay on good terms with the healer, he would have taken that mysterious archer down from behind without a second thought the moment he turned around. Mocking the archer, he scoffs that the guy was probably nothing more than an inexperienced amateur, urging the rest of the crew to hurry up and get the mission over with. The companions laugh along with him, thoroughly convinced they are the strongest ones around, unaware that a deadly presence is already watching their every move from the shadows. Out of nowhere, the whistling sound of high-speed projectiles tears through the air as two arrows streak forward with terrifying precision. Before anyone can react, the cloaked companion in the back is struck dead on, letting out a sharp cry of agony as the sudden assault lands directly on target. The smug archer turns around in pure shock, horror seizing him as his teammate collapses right behind him without warning. 009.jpg. Panic instantly erupts throughout the squad as they frantically look in every direction, desperately trying to spot the invisible sniper concealed within the dark woods. Before they can even process the first attack, another sharp gust cuts through the trees as a second volley of deadly arrows comes flying right at them. The projectile cuts through the darkness at blinding speed, giving them no time to evade the incoming strike. Another teammate is instantly taken down by a direct hit to the chest, leaving the remaining fighters screaming in terror as they desperately question where the unseen attacker is firing from. Realizing they are sitting ducks in the middle of the open path, the order is shouted for everyone to scatter immediately. Leaving their fallen comrades behind on the trail, the survivors sprint into the dense tree line in a desperate scramble to find cover. A suffocating, tense silence falls over the foggy woods as the remaining hunters hide among the bushes, holding their breath and waiting for any sign of movement. Couched tightly behind the foliage, the scout and his partner scan the shadowy perimeter, trying to spot the invisible sniper before they are targeted next. Suddenly, the faint rustling of leaves and the crisp snap of a twig echo from deeper within the thicket. Catching the subtle sound, the scout narrows his eyes and locks onto the direction of the noise, whispering that he finally found the attacker's location. With a quick nod, the partner moves out, preparing to flank the target and flush the sniper out into the open. The scout gives the signal for his comrade to advance, staying low to the ground while keeping his own guard completely raised. Creeping quietly forward, the fighter slowly parts the dense bushes, peeking into the small clearing ahead to locate their prey. Unbeknownst to him, a shadow has already silently materialized right behind him, brandishing a gleaming blade with a chilling, predatory glare. Before the scout can even grasp what is happening, a towering figure looms directly over him with an eerie, menacing smile. In a single fluid motion, the cold steel is raised high into the air, ready to deliver a decisive strike. The sharp blade catches the faint moonlight as it swings downward in a swift, merciless arc. In an instant, the attacker eliminates the scout with lightning precision, seizing him from behind and taking him down before he can utter a sound. Hearing the sudden commotion, the surviving party archer immediately snaps around and looses an arrow straight toward the assailant, shouting that he finally got him. The arrow hits its mark as the cloaked youth winces in pain from the impact, while the hostile archer readies his next shot from across the trail. The young fighter stumbles slightly, catching his balance as he looks around the dark trees to gauge the enemy's next move. Reaching down to his side, he firmly grips the shaft of the arrow lodged in his armor, preparing to pull it free. Instead of panic, an unsettling, sharp grin slowly spreads across his face as blood drips from his weapon. His eyes glow with predatory excitement, thoroughly amused by their futile resistance and confident in his absolute advantage. In rapid succession, another pair of arrows slices through the air, aimed directly at him to shut down any counterattack. The desperate archer screams out in rage, firing with everything he has in hopes of finishing off the cloaked hunter. With uncanny agility, the youth performs a clean mid-air roll, evading the lethal volley just in the nick of time. Both arrows thud deeply into the thick tree trunk behind him, missing their mark entirely. Landing smoothly, his cold, piercing gaze locks onto the treetops as he tracks where the next threat will emerge. High above in the canopy, the subtle creak of a bending branch gives away the enemy's elevated position. Peering from behind a thick tree trunk, the enemy archer keeps his eyes fixed downward, trying to pinpoint his target's exact footing. Without taking his gaze away, he reaches into his quiver and smoothly knocks another fresh arrow into place. Below on the ground, the cloaked hero draws his bowstring back with cold composure, already locking his aim toward the upper branches. A swift arrow tears upward through the air, whistling toward the canopy with lethal velocity. The enemy archer barely manages to duck, shocked that the incoming shot missed him by mere inches. The Jarrow embeds itself deeply into the branch, right where his head was resting just a fraction of a second earlier. Realizing how dangerously close he just came to being eliminated, sweat pours down his face in pure terror. The force of the impact snaps the heavy wooden branch entirely, throwing the archer off balance as it falls. Scrambling to recover, he hastily pulls his bow taut once more, grimacing through the intense pressure as he searches the fog below. Panic overtakes his mind as he stares at the empty clearing beneath him, utterly clueless as to where the cloaked hunter vanished. Before the archer can react, the cloaked hunter drops down from above with a manic grin, raising his blade to strike. With ruthless speed and precision, the attack lands cleanly before any defense can be raised. The dagger drives deeply into the archer's back, instantly taking down the party's primary ranged attacker. Standing over the defeated hunter with an eerie, calm smile, he holds the hilt firmly in place to ensure the fight is finished. Nearby, the final remaining member of the team trembles on the ground, frantically reaching for a weapon in complete despair. Glancing sideways with glowing crimson eyes, the predator chuckles under his breath, whispering that he can hear every little move. The terrified girl raises her trembling sword with both hands, frantically screaming for him to stay back as total hopelessness sets in. Slowly stepping through the shadows, his towering presence completely closes the distance between them. Looking down at his helpless prey with a chilling demonic smile, he revels in the absolute terror before delivering the final blow. Meanwhile, along another sunlit forest trail, a completely different group travels together in a steady march. Walking beside the blonde healer, the burly red-haired leader breaks the silence, asking him to share more details about that lone archer from before. Adam smiles calmly at the mention of Jake, appearing relaxed despite the leader's probing curiosity. He explains that there isn't much to say, stating that they were simply ordinary co-workers before this whole world turned upside down. The leader narrows his eyes with subtle suspicion, pointing out that Adam seemed far too friendly when bidding that archer farewell. Adam fondly recalls his past life back at the office, where he used to manage the team and always watched over his colleagues like family. He adds that protecting his people has always come naturally to him, a mindset that stayed with him even in this harsh reality. The leader places a firm, reassuring hand on Adam's shoulder, praising his loyalty, while downplaying the previous tension to put the healer at ease. Gently patting Adam's chest, he promises that no one under his wing will ever face harm, emphasizing that working together is their only way to survive. Adam pauses in slight confusion, repeating the word camp as if he hadn't realized they were being brought to an entire settlement. With a proud, hearty grin, the leader gestures ahead, asking if Adam really thought their little travel group was all they had. Stepping out to the edge of the overlook, the warrior looks down with deep satisfaction at the fortress of people gathered below. JPG newcomers, he officially welcomes the newcomers to their base of operations, overlooking an expansive compound teeming with tents and survivors. Rows upon rows of neatly organized encampments and training grounds stretch across the sandy valley, showing just how organized and populated this faction truly is. Smiling warmly at the sight, the red-haired leader remarks that while it might not seem like much yet, their community is expanding day by day. Looking out over the bustling encampment from between the trees, the rest of the group can't help but feel awestruck by its sheer scale. The blonde mage and her companion walk forward with genuine excitement, agreeing that having a secure base like this makes survival look far more promising. Down in the open courtyard, survivors are seen actively training and greeting newcomers with friendly waves, creating an atmosphere of safety and hope. Seeing such an organized sanctuary after days of wandering through danger, the young traveler clasps his hands together in absolute wonder, murmuring that the place is downright perfect. Suddenly, one of the scouts freezes in place, his eyes widening in alarm as he asks if anyone else can hear the approaching commotion. Heavy, panicked footsteps echo from the edge of the canyon, breaking the peaceful atmosphere of the settlement. A disheveled female warrior sprints frantically through the rows of tents toward the center of the camp, her face pale with utter terror. Seeing an intruder rushing toward them, the red-haired leader instantly raises his hand, roaring an urgent command for the guards to take action. Reacting in a split second, a skilled sentry spins his crystal-tipped daggers with deadly poise, preparing to intercept the runner. Adam nervously gulps, his heart racing as the sudden escalation of tension threatens to turn violent. Before anyone can attack, another guard quickly shouts for everyone to hold back, recognizing the terrified runner as one of their own scouts. Gasping desperately for air, the girl stumbles forward and calls out to the boss with trembling desperation. Remember hand in sheer panic, she collapses forward, completely overwhelmed by whatever horrors she barely managed to escape. The leader looks down with a grim expression, demanding to know where Nicholas is and what in the world happened to her entire squad. Resting her hands against her knees, the survivor trembles under the leader's intense gaze, completely drained of energy. A look of sheer fury washes over the commander's face as he immediately assumes Nicholas turned traitor and eliminated his own squad. Pointing an accusatory finger, he presses her aggressively, asking if Nicholas was the one responsible for wiping out the entire team. Desperately shaking her head, she stammers out through tears that Nicholas didn't betray anyone. He was eliminated alongside the rest. The boss roars in disbelief and anger, stunned that one of his strongest fighters could be defeated so easily. Clutching her head in trauma, the survivor cries out in panic, revealing that it was the lone archer who ambushed them all in the woods. Losing his temper completely, the red-haired warrior barks in her face, aggressively demanding to know why she was spared if everyone else was taken down. Poking aggressively at her chest armor, he towers over her until she finally admits that the archer left her alive on purpose, just to deliver a message. His eyes widen in shock as she reveals the attacker's chilling words, mockingly stating that Nicholas put up a decent fight before going down. Hearing those ominous words, Adam's eyes widen with unease, as the survivor adds that the archer meant every single word of his earlier warning. Enraged by the humiliation, the commander violently grabs her by the collar, pulling her close as his fury boils over. Grit teeth and glaring down with intense menace, he demands she spit out every single detail of what took place in those woods. Trembling uncontrollably in his grip, the traumatized girl stammers that the attacker wasn't even human. He seemed to genuinely enjoy tearing through them. The sinister image of the sniper's eerie, grinning face flashes through her memory like a living nightmare. Her pupils dilate in sheer panic as she screams at the top of her lungs, desperately warning everyone that the archer is an absolute monster. Sweat pouring down her pale face, she looks at the stunned encampment, utterly shattered by the overwhelming power of the lone hunter. Deep in the quiet forest, Jake decides it is finally time to find a secure spot to rest and recover. Stepping carefully across the dense undergrowth, He reflects on how exhausting and non-stop everything has been since yesterday. Finding a brief moment of safety, he summons his glowing blue system interface to review all the pending notifications that piled up during combat. A battle log details his recent victories against enemy combatants, showing significant amounts of experience and tutorial points gained from the encounters. With a light tap of his finger, he scrolls down to see that his archer class has successfully advanced to level 7. The Bristum rewards his progress with additional free stat points, ready to be allocated toward his core abilities. Looking over the interface with calm focus, he notes that surviving intense, continuous battles has steadily driven his level higher. He ponders investing his 3 available free points into endurance or vitality, which would help him endure repeated sleepless nights of combat. However, recalling past clashes against swift, lethal monsters, he realizes perception might offer far better synergy with his innate bloodline power. Resting his chin in thought, as memories of close-range melee battles flash across his mind, he prepares to optimize his stats for whatever danger comes next. Making his decision, he firmly taps the prompt on screen, officially allocating all of his available stat points directly into perception. Pulling up his overall profile status, he notices with a frown that he has less than a third of his maximum health remaining. His health points sit dangerously low, at just 94 out of 340, while his boosted perception has climbed to 37. Reflecting on the recent ambush, he admits to himself that the hostile archer managed to land a surprisingly solid shot on him. He recognizes that he will need to be far more vigilant moving forward, especially since the healer is no longer around to patch up his injuries. Reaching down to rub his bruised side, he checks the tear in his shirt where the arrow pierced through. He remembers that Adam provided him with a few recovery potions, but he knows he must ration them strictly for real emergencies, just as a low, menacing growl echoes through the bushes. Before he can dismiss his floating status window, a ferocious pack of wild wolves slowly steps out of the forest, completely surrounding him on all sides. Letting out a dry chuckle at his terrible luck, he glances around at the predators closing in, while his health is critically depleted. Rather than panicking, a confident and fearless smirk stretches across his face, fully ready to take on the pack with everything he has. Back at the camp, Caroline is focused on securing her tent when a friendly voice calls out from behind, waving to catch her attention. She pauses and turns around with a surprised expression as the blonde youth asks if her name is Caroline. Covering his face in slight embarrassment, he brings up how he was previously standing among the camp leader's vanguard fighters. He kneels down beside her with an apologetic smile, wanting to clear the air and promising that he isn't actually one of those reckless, aggressive fighters. Sitting casually on the dirt ground beside her, he takes the initiative to break the ice and build trust with the newcomers. Flashing a bright, cheerful grin, the young fighter politely introduces himself by the name of William. Caroline glances at his relaxed gesture, noting to herself that he seems noticeably younger than the battle-hardened veterans in the camp. She looks back at him with a slight, knowing smirk, silently acknowledging just how youthful he appears compared to the others. Though throwing his hands up in mild frustration, William admits that being only 19 made it almost impossible to get accepted into a serious party. He explains that he had to put on a tough, intimidating act and spin his throwing knives just so the older fighters would take him seriously. William awkwardly scratches his cheek, swearing that deep down he is just an ordinary guy doing his best to make it through this ordeal. Caroline touches her chest sympathetically, feeling a genuine wave of pity for the young fighter trying so hard to survive on his own. As she looks away, a subtle, sly smile quietly appears, hinting that things might not be entirely as innocent as they seem. The scene transitions to the following morning, where bright sunlight begins filtering through the dense canopy of the deep forest. Across the forest floor, the aftermath of a fierce midnight clash is revealed, with defeated wolves scattered motionlessly around the clearing. A small white rabbit hops gently over the fallen beasts, exploring the quiet woods in the early hours. Curious, the little creature sniffs a pile of leaves until an arm suddenly bursts out from underneath, sending the startled bunny darting away. Gasping for air as he emerges from his makeshift cover, the archer groggily wonders just how long he has been knocked out. Sitting up in a daze, he brushes dried leaves off his bruised armor, checking himself over after surviving the night's brutal skirmish. Looking up at the bright sky through the lush branches, he sighs in relief, realizing morning has finally arrived. Brushing leaves and twigs out of his messy hair, Jake stretches his stiff muscles after a rough night sleeping in the wilderness. Dusting off his gear, he realizes there is little reason to obsess over staying clean when another tough battle could break out at any second. Looking up at the sunlit trees, he reminds himself that he is completely on his own now and resolves to get back to leveling up without delay. He begins by hunting swift game in the forest, securing fresh supplies and honing his precision with every shot. Drawing his recurve bow taut against a nearby tree trunk, he tracks fast-moving airborne targets through the branches with sharp focus. Facing a massive wild boar that charges directly at him, Jake grapples its tusks head-on with pure strength to bring the beast down. In a fluid follow-through, he cleanly finishes off aggressive forest monsters with a swift, decisive strike of his hunting blade. Even when pinned under the crushing weight of a giant ape monster, Jake keeps his composure, holding back its ferocious assault until he finds an opening. Standing victorious over the defeated giant beast, he checks his notifications with satisfaction, pleased that his archer class pushed all the way to level 10 in a single day. As he inspects the fallen creature, a subtle bright glint from nearby catches his sharp eyes, hinting at a hidden reward. Looking up high into the leafy canopy, Jake spots an unusual bright glint reflecting through the branches and wonders what is causing the light. He cautiously raps his knuckles against the thick bark, questioning if it might be an enemy trap. Yet his sharp senses register zero immediate threat. Realizing he won't know for certain unless he checks it himself, he places his hands on the trunk to begin climbing. Stepping up branch by branch, he leaves the ground behind and enters the shaded foliage above. Reaching a sturdy branch, Jake squints slightly through the sunlight filtering across the canopy, looking for the source of the glimmer. Balancing carefully, he maneuvers his footing across the large mossy limb high in the treetops. Peering through the opening in the dense wood, his eyes lock onto a concealed hollow tucked into the main trunk. Sitting comfortably inside the tree cavity, he discovers an ornate, glowing jewelry box hidden away from the rest of the world. Reaching in with both hands, he firmly grabs the mysterious gem-encrusted container, ready to uncover what valuable treasure lies inside. Holding the ornate chest, a blue system interface chimes to life, identifying the container as an uncommon magical jeweled lockbox, designed to hold rare and powerful loot. Jake examines the green and gold chest with keen interest, curious about how the system generates and hides these rewards throughout the tutorial zone. With a slight grin, he realizes that exploring the uncharted forest truly offers classic RPG loot for those observant enough to discover it. He firmly lifts the heavy lid open with a solid clunk, eager to inspect whatever treasure was stored within the hollowed tree. Inside lies a fine pair of brown leather bracers, immediately prompting a system notification detailing their uncommon rarity and unique enchantments. A gear provides automatic self-repair, solid stat boost to agility and strength, and enhances the overall effectiveness of all stealth techniques. Equipping the leather bracers onto his forearms, Jake admires the snug fit, noting that while he knows nothing about the Order of Umbra, the stat boosts are invaluable. Before closing the container, his keen eyes catch another faint glint remaining at the bottom of the velvet lining. Reaching down, he finds a golden tutorial equipment upgrade token, capable of boosting any basic starter item up to common rarity. 070.jpg. Resting his hand thoughtfully against his chin, Jake considers upgrading his reliable bow, though he acknowledges it has already served him exceptionally well. Turning his gaze toward his tattered gear, Jake wonders what kind of improvements an upgrade token would grant to his worn cloak. He inspects the frayed edges and dried battle stains clinging to the fabric after countless intense encounters. A satisfied smile forms on his face as he taps the interface, deciding that repairing and strengthening his primary cover makes the token completely worthwhile. A surge of subtle magical energy washes over the ragged cloth as the upgrade process takes effect. If a steady hum of light, the tears across the dark fabric begin knitting themselves back together, restoring the material to pristine condition. The PED system alerts him that his gear has officially evolved into an archer's cloak of common rarity, granting enhanced resistance against slashing blows and the self-repair enchantment. Giving a casual shrug, he acknowledges that while it isn't quite as powerful as the bracers, having self-mending defense in the field is a massive advantage. Sheeting his eyes with his newly armored forearm, Jake looks out across the vast expanse of the forest canopy, determined to track down more hidden treasure chests. He reasons that the most valuable and powerful loot boxes are likely concealed in the most dangerous and unexplored corners of the territory. Jake recalls the massive level 13 mammoth spider he faced earlier, recognizing it as the most dangerous and formidable beast he has encountered so far. Applying classic game logic, he theorizes that an elite creature of that caliber had to be guarding a high-tier secret or rare treasure. He grimaces as he remembers the massive cave-in, realizing that the previous cavern is completely sealed off and inaccessible. Standing at the edge of the high cliff, he gazes across the vast mountain valley, wondering if there might be another hidden dungeon or cave entrance in the area. Sliding down the steep ridge, he heads off into the wild terrain to begin scouting the surrounding peaks. Several hours of searching through the rugged, rocky wilderness led him directly toward a dark, hollow opening embedded in the cliffside. Walking across the barren stone plateau toward the yawning cavern, Jake notes that its layout and structure look noticeably different from the previous lair. Narrowing his sharp eyes as he focuses his perception, he detects no obvious monster presence inside. Yet his heightened instincts urge him to remain on high alert. As he steps deeper into the cavern, a flock of disturbed bats screeches and scatters across the ceiling, while his instincts tell him something truly special is waiting further down. Pulling his cloak tightly over his shoulder, he proceeds cautiously into the pitch-black tunnels ahead. A confident, excited grin spreads across his face as the thrill of exploring an unknown domain takes over. Holding a blazing torch high in one hand with his bow ready in the other, Jake navigates past patches of glowing blue bioluminescent mushrooms illuminating the path. A cheery blue glow casts long shadows against the damp stone walls and thick vegetation growing deep underground. Approaching one of the oversized glowing caps, he inspects the vibrant blue flora lighting the cavern floor. Let down curiously, he reaches out toward the strange glowing mushroom, wondering if it holds any alchemical properties. Suddenly, the heavy, echoing creak of aging wood reverberates through the quiet chamber, drawing his immediate attention. Framed by glowing fungus and overgrown grass, an ancient, weathered wooden door stands embedded directly into the rocky cliffside. Reaching out his hand toward the damp, decaying timber, Jake wonders just how long this forgotten entrance has remained hidden in the depths. As Jake touches the weathered entrance, a vibrant system notification rings out, declaring that he has discovered a hidden tutorial challenge dungeon. Standing firmly with his bow slung over his shoulder, he pauses to review the unique conditions tied to this secret domain. The glowing blue window expands before him, displaying the official parameters and entry restrictions. Scanning the text, he learns that entry requires being below level 10, having no assigned profession, and ranking within the top 5% of tutorial points, criteria he meets across the board. A decisive prompt appears asking if he wishes to enter the dungeon. prompting Jake to narrow his eyes in focused concentration. Looking up at the threshold of the challenge, he mutters to himself that turning down an opportunity like this is completely out of the question. A bold, daring smile spreads across his face as he readies himself to step past the threshold and claim whatever trials and rewards await inside. But passing through the threshold, Jake finds himself walking into a breathtaking underground cavern filled with hundreds of glowing blue mushrooms cascading along the rocky walls. Looking around at the otherworldly blue glow illuminating the dark passage, he is left wondering what kind of mystical place he just entered. A bright blue system notification chimes before him, confirming his entry into the challenge dungeon with an objective to survive to the end and overcome all trials presented along the way. He raises an eyebrow at the vague instructions, wondering if that really was all the guidance the system intended to provide. Suddenly, a warm, pulsing light radiates from his chest, catching his immediate attention as an ornate ruby pendant materializes around his neck. Resting his hands over the glowing crystal, another system window appears, identifying the artifact as the Necklace of Holding, given to all dungeon challengers. He smiles faintly upon reading that the necklace grants him access to a private dimensional pocket for item storage. Tapping the ruby with a thoughtful expression, Jake ponders whether being granted personal storage space serves as a subtle clue to the nature of the upcoming trial. Before he can ponder further, a bright surge of magical golden energy ignites and swirls rapidly before his eyes. The ruby pendant around his neck violently flares with brilliant golden light, humming with powerful magical energy. Shocked by the intense glow radiating from the gem, Jake shields his eyes, suddenly realizing that something is trapped inside. He gasps as a blinding light erupts directly from the amulet, threatening to burst free right against his chest. In a sudden flash, a bizarre bat-winged blue demon beast shoots out from the gem, flapping its wings with razor-sharp claws extended. The creature brandishes its pointed tail and sharp talons, letting out a low, aggressive growl as it prepares to strike. Jake quickly drops into a defensive combat stance, staring in disbelief and demanding to know what kind of monster just appeared. Reacting by pure reflex, he immediately reaches back to grab his dagger to defend himself. His heart skips a beat as his hand grasps only empty air, realizing in absolute shock that all of his equipped weapons have vanished. Staring at his bare hands with wide eyes, he realizes the dungeon stripped him of his gear just as the challenge begins. With a terrifying roar, the winged beast lunges straight at him with outstretched claws, leaving him completely unarmed. The blue demon creature swoops in from above with its tiny claws flared, targeting Jake in a full dive. Jake stares blankly at the attacker with a deadpan expression, quickly realizing the tiny creature's assault is utterly harmless. The blue imp frantically claws, bites, and scratches all over his shoulders and armor, but fails to inflict a single scratch against his high defense. Infuriated by Jake's lack of reaction, the little beast grabs onto his leg and angrily shouts that it will show him who is truly pathetic. Jake covers his head and leans back in genuine astonishment, stunned that the summoned imp can actually speak fluent human words. The winged imp clings stubbornly to Jake's pant leg, glaring up with puffed cheeks as it refuses to let go. As Jake takes a step back, a sharp metallic click echoes from beneath his boot, triggering a glowing trap embedded deep within the stone floor. A jagged stone spire suddenly erupts from the wall and launches forward like a high-speed missile, forcing Jake to react instantly. With razor-sharp instincts, Jake ducks cleanly beneath the flying projectile as a massive rotating spike drills past his head by mere inches. Twinting his body mid-fall, Jake executes a swift, evasive slide across the cavern floor to clear the lethal trajectory of the mechanical trap. Looking back mid-evasion, Jake instantly realizes that the entire cavern corridor is rigged with deadly hidden traps. The massive stone spike slams directly into the ground with explosive force, pulverizing the bedrock into jagged rubble. Hovering overhead, the blue imp snickers maliciously, taking petty joy in watching Jake scramble for his life. Noticing a foul, sizzling green glow rising from the impact crater, Jake grimaces, realizing the projectile is laced with corrosive acid that erodes anything it touches. Pushing himself back, Jake shouts in frustration, demanding to know what kind of unfair death trap this challenge really is. The imp scoffs with an annoyed scowl, replying that it has no obligation to explain the dungeon's mechanics. The creature grumbles that it is merely an unlucky captive trapped inside the pendant, catching Jake's interest as he questions who placed it there. Before Jake can press for answers, the sharp, ominous sound of grinding gears echoes once again from the cave walls. Another glowing mechanical trap ignites along the wall, launching a second high-speed drill spike straight toward him as the imp mockingly warns him to focus on survival. Dropping low into a 4-point slide, Jake skids across the glowing mushroom field, barely dodging the incoming projectile with split-second agility. Closing his eyes for a split second, Jake takes a deep breath to center his focus, while the imp taunts that the traps are closing in fast. Deciding to ignore the annoying creature for now, Jake locks his eyes onto the heavy wooden gate marking the end of the corridor. The narrow stone hallway stretches ahead, filled with lethal mechanisms, waiting to trigger at the slightest disturbance. Exploding into a full sprint, Jake launches forward with breathtaking speed, his cloak trailing behind him as he crosses the danger zone. Moving with extreme agility, he maneuvers across the glowing mushroom pathway, evading every pressure plate in his stride. Treeps erupt simultaneously along both walls, firing blazing bursts and giant drills directly across his path as he weaves through the onslaught. Jiving beneath another devastating barrage, Jake controls his momentum with pinpoint precision, letting the explosive kinetic force pass right over him. Surging with pure momentum, he pushes past the final section of the gauntlet at blinding speed. Sliding past the safe threshold, Jake catches his breath against the stone archway, while a begrudging voice admits that the performance wasn't half bad. Looking back with an exasperated expression at the hovering blue imp, Jake asks if the creature simply plans on following him around the entire dungeon. The imp hovers casually upside down, smirking as it admits it has nowhere else to go anyway. Jake mutters a sarcastic remark, turning his focus toward the next section of the dungeon. Entering a massive vertical chamber, he looks up to see glowing platforms suspended in midair, leading toward a bright doorway at the top. Jake stares up in awe at the floating geometric stepping stones spanning across the cavern. A new system prompt chimes in, presenting the next challenge: collecting 5 silver mushrooms located within the room. Resting his chin in thought, Jake realizes the storage necklace was given precisely so he could hold and transport these trial items. Looking closer at the sheer rock face, Jake immediately spots several suspicious holes hollowed into the walls. Resting atop each floating platform are bright red mushrooms, positioned right in the line of fire of the wall openings. Jake deduces that approaching any mushroom will trigger another volley of corrosive acid spikes, while the imp suggests calculating the angles to predict their trajectory. Floating close, the imp advises plotting an optimized path across the platforms to minimize exposure to the incoming traps. Jake firmly plants his boot onto the first activation switch, preparing to trigger the trap on his own terms. A daring, thrill-seeking grin spreads across his face as he rejects taking the safe and cautious approach. With incredible explosive power, Jake leaps high into the air toward the glowing, floating platforms above. The wall mechanisms instantly ignite in response, unleashing another high-speed drill projectile across the open space. The blue imp zips backwards through the air in total shock, watching Jake charge headfirst into danger. Sliding smoothly across the surface of the floating block, Jake grabs the first target mushroom in a single, clean swoop. As multiple wall traps ignite simultaneously around him, Jake relies completely on his heightened agility and enhanced perception. Flipping upside down mid-air with acrobatic grace, he effortlessly dodges the barrage, realizing he can simply speedrun the entire gauntlet. Vaulting seamlessly from one platform to the next, he sweeps up the remaining mushrooms as his system log rapidly updates his collection progress. Hovering nearby, the imp's eyes widen in genuine disbelief at how effortlessly Jake conquers the lethal obstacle course. Mid-sprint, Jake reaches out and scoops up the fourth required mushroom from the surface of the floating platform. The system log updates immediately, notifying him that he has successfully collected 4 out of the 5 necessary items. Perched atop a nearby ledge, the blue imp chuckles with malicious glee, waiting for the dungeon's true trap to unleash. Suddenly, the imp's smug grin completely vanishes, its eyes widening in pure horror as an immense surge of energy begins charging from the cavern wall. A massive wall portal ignites into a blinding, searing sphere of fire, aiming directly toward the platforms. In sheer panic, the imp screams out in terror as the cavern is engulfed in an intense red heat wave. Looking back at the incoming blast, Jake winces in disbelief, completely stunned by the sheer destructive scale of the attack. With no time to hesitate, Jake launches himself off the edge of the floating platform in a desperate bid to clear the blast zone. A colossal blazing projectile tears through the chamber, incinerating the platform right where they were standing just a moment before. Falling through mid-air, Jake twists his body, desperately searching for another footing as the shockwave ripples across the room. Mid-air, Jake grabs the terrified imp and shields it with his own body as they both tackle hard onto the surface of a lower floating platform. The impact sends them skidding forcefully across the stone ledge, narrowly avoiding the lethal line of fire. Jake comes to a sliding halt right at the precipice, holding the creature tightly beneath his cloak. Lying on his back and panting heavily, Jake catches his breath while sweat drips down his face from the intense close call. Slowly sitting up, the trembling blue imp looks at Jake and genuinely admits that it owes him one for saving its life. The imp shivers in residual shock, still overwhelmed by how close it came to being obliterated by the flaming blast. Furious, Jake barks right back, aggressively demanding to know what in the world is wrong with the reckless creature, snapping that he didn't risk his neck to save anyone. Jake fumes, while the imp whines that spending millennia trapped inside a pendant left it rusty. Waving its tiny blue claws defensively, the creature grumbles that its reflexes and agility aren't quite what they used to be in its prime. Narrowing his sharp eyes in frustration, Jake stares down at the winged beast and demands to know what kind of creature it actually is, prompting a proud huff as it declares itself an imp. The blue imp introduces himself with an arrogant smirk as Cecil, while Jake casually states his own name in return. Dusting off his clothes with a series of light pats, Jake gets straight to the point and asks Cecil who originally sealed him inside the pendant. Cecil brushes off the question with a tired sigh, claiming that the whole ordeal is an ancient, long story he would rather not talk about. Scratching his oversized ear, the imp mockingly apologizes, pointing out that Jake failed to collect the 5th and final mushroom before the blast hit. A confident, knowing smirk forms on Jake's face as he chuckles at the creature's premature assumption. Looking directly at the imp with total composure, Jake casually questions who said anything about missing it. Opening his palm, Jake reveals the final red mushroom in his hand as a system alert chimes, officially confirming the completion of the 5-item challenge. Stunned by Jake's incredible reflexes, Cecil admits that the archer is surprisingly skilled at handling deadly situations. Giving a playful shrug with raised claws, Cecil snickers that only an absolute madman would boldly sprint headfirst through a room rigged with lethal traps. Hovering smugly over Jake, Cecil grins and admits that as far as reckless challengers go, the archer clearly possesses exceptional natural talent. Continuing down the dungeon path, Jake enters the next expansive chamber, looking down at a vast underground cavern. Standing at the ledge with Cecil, Jake overlooks a deadly lake of bubbling green acid, filled with raised stone pillars. He notes with caution that the entire chamber floor is submerged in caustic liquid, leaving the stone platforms as the only pathway across. A glowing blue system window appears, setting the next trial. Use the platforms to navigate through 3 consecutive rooms, with a strict 15-minute limit per zone. Jake ponders the simple objective, questioning if completing the trial really just comes down to hopping from one platform to another. Resting his chin against his hand, he considers the task ahead and thinks to himself that traversing the pillars shouldn't be too difficult. Suddenly, a harsh red system alert flashes with a sharp chime, announcing that all of his stats have been forcibly reduced to a base level of 10, and all skills are disabled. A heavy crimson aura surges violently around him, instantly stripping away his physical enhancements and heightened perception. Stumbling back in utter shock as a wave of weakness washes over his body, Jake gasps in panic as his superhuman agility completely vanishes. A blue system message clarifies that all restricted stats and abilities will only be restored upon fully clearing the challenge. Staggering heavily under the sudden debuff, Jake grabs his shoulder as the full weight of physical exhaustion and baseline limits crashes over him. He drops low into the shadows, struggling to maintain his footing without his superhuman agility to balance him. Cold sweat runs down Jake's pale face as the horrifying realization sinks in that he must cross a sea of bubbling acid completely vulnerable and unassisted. Stepping forward along the stone ledge, Jake approaches the next challenge area with Cecil fluttering overhead. Before them lies an expansive cavern flooded entirely with a bubbling lake of lethal green acid, dotted with narrow stone pillars. Jake gazes across the hazardous expanse, noting how the entire chamber floor is completely submerged in corrosive liquid. A glowing blue system window appears, outlining the trial objective. Navigate across the platforms through 3 separate rooms, within a strict 15-minute time limit per chamber. Jake considers the objective, wondering if the challenge really only requires jumping from pillar to pillar across the liquid. Resting his hand on his chin in deep thought, he muses that simple platforming doesn't sound too intimidating. Suddenly, a chime rings out as a system message flashes, forcefully reducing all of his stats to a static 10 and completely disabling his skills. A heavy wave of fatigue washes over him as he realizes his physical strength and stamina have plummeted back to baseline levels. Dropping to his knees, his trembling hands shake against the cold stone floor as he struggles to adjust to his weakened body. Struggling to catch his breath, Jake grimaces in frustration, remarking that it feels as though the cavern's gravity suddenly multiplied tenfold. Bracing his palms firmly against his knees, he pushes himself up into a standing position to test his heavily restricted mobility. A glowing stat screen confirms that every single attribute has been reduced down to a flat 10, leaving his parameters nearly as low as when he first entered the tutorial. Suddenly, a vibrant pulse of purple energy ripples outward from his body, expanding across the room as he tests his inner senses. Concentric rings of translucent energy expand beneath his feet, projecting his innate spatial awareness across the entire cavern. His spherical domain continues expanding into the dark chamber, mapping out every platform and hidden elevation in real time. A unique system window identifies his bloodline of the Primal Hunter, revealing that its innate sphere of perception remains active and unaffected because it is classified as a bloodline trait rather than a skill. Standing straight, Jake looks around in quiet contemplation, wondering about the true nature and origin of his unique bloodline power, as Cecil flutters over to check on him. Looking up at the concerned imp, Jake shakes off the dizziness and apologizes for zoning out. Cecil points urgently toward the floating system interface, warning Jake that his 15-minute countdown is already ticking down rapidly. Standing at the ledge overlooking the deadly green lake, Jake reassesses the objective, realizing he simply needs to cross the chamber without ever making contact with the acid. Looking down at the nearest stone pillar, he notices a glowing luminous square marking embedded directly on top of its surface. Examining the surrounding pillars across the bubbling liquid, he spots 3 distinct categories of platforms laid out before him. Each platform is etched with a different glowing symbol, hinting at a specific sequence or puzzle mechanic required to navigate safely. Focusing on the first pillar, Jake observes a stylized illustration depicting a snake wrapped tightly around an object. Let's out an exhausted sigh. Jake shakes his head in mild annoyance as he realizes what the snake is holding. He dryly remarks on the recurring theme, noticing that the serpent is coiled around yet another mushroom. Shifting his gaze to the next platform type, he prepares to analyze the second distinct emblem. The second symbol shows a magnificent winged serpent elevated high, while various smaller humanoid and imp creatures bow beneath it in worship. Moving his attention to the final pattern, Jake inspects the third platform and identifies the fierce winged dragon creature as a wyvern. Looking closer at the glowing wyvern emblem, Jake studies the sharp wings and intricate details shining against the stone. Resting his knuckles against his mouth, Jake theorizes that the 3 symbols might represent stages of a growth cycle, prompting Cecil to nod in agreement with the clever observation. Looking across the massive cavern toward the glowing exit portal on the far ledge, Jake sees dozens of patterned pillars spanning the hazardous pool. He realizes that simply knowing the lore behind the symbols doesn't reveal which platforms are safe to step on without falling into the acid. Cecil playfully sighs that it's a shame humans weren't born with wings, urging Jake to put his mind to work. Deep in concentration, Jake scans the room for additional clues, wondering if the faint blue light shining from the platform switches looks familiar. The square rune embedded in the nearest pillar emits a low, pulsing hum with a soft blue luminescence. Cecil tilts his head with an inquisitive expression, asking Jake what exactly he noticed about the glowing energy. A confident smile returns to Jake's face as an idea forms, prompting him to crouch down and firmly pluck one of the glowing blue mushrooms growing along the ledge. Rearing his arm back with the glowing cap in hand, Jake prepares to test his theory under Cecil's curious gaze. Winding up his throw, Jake locks his eyes onto the nearest stone pillar with steady concentration. With a clean follow-through, he tosses the glowing mushroom directly toward the floating platform. The blue cap sails through the air, arching cleanly over the bubbling pool of acid. Landing squarely on the stone surface with a light tap, the mushroom rolls directly over the glowing square rune. Instantly, the rune activates as the platform begins absorbing the glowing mushroom into its stone surface. A bright, magical hum pulses through the pillar, proving his theory correct, that the snake symbols require mushroom sacrifices to trigger. Cecil claps his claws together with a wide, excited grin, visibly impressed by the deduction. Laughing with satisfaction as Cecil praises his quick thinking, Jake notes that the deactivated state only lasts for a few short seconds. Crouching low, Jake reasons that the actively glowing platforms serve as lethal trap triggers for anyone reckless enough to step on them. Reaching down to pluck another glowing mushroom, he formulates his strategy. Neutralize each platform's active glow just before leaping across. Looking down at the bubbling green pool below, Cecil nervously remarks that he hopes Jake's intuition doesn't fail them now. Checking the timer showing barely over 9 minutes remaining, Jake steels his resolve, knowing he has to take the leap rather than stall forever. Stepping up to the crumbling cliff edge, Jake braces his feet against the stone, zeroing his focus entirely on the first target. With a precise flick of his wrist, he tosses another glowing blue mushroom toward the forward pillar. The mushroom bounces lightly on the dark stone and lands right on top of the glowing square rune, activating its deactivation sequence. Taking a deep breath as the rune absorbs the blue cap, Jake hypes himself up to execute the perilous jump. His expression turns fiercely focused, committing everything to the physical effort, despite his lowered stats. Digging his boots in, Jake launches himself into a forward dash straight off the edge of the precipice. Clinging desperately to the back of his cloak, Cecil screams in utter terror, pleading not to be dropped into the acid below. Soaring through the open air directly above the bubbling caustic lake, Jake aims for a solid landing on the first neutralized pillar. Jake lands firmly with a sharp skid onto the surface of the first pillar, smoothly stabilizing his balance while Cecil touches down beside him. A triumphant smirk spreads across Jake's face, thrilled to find himself completely unharmed after taking the risky leap. Clenching his fist with pumped excitement, he feels a surge of confidence as his strategy proves completely viable. Cecil cheers in relief before abruptly catching himself, grumbling defensively about why he should even care about a human's survival. Executing a rapid succession of leaps across the remaining neutralized pillars, Jake hurtles across the acid pool and dives toward the glowing doorway, tracing a seamless arc from one stone pillar to the next. His precise footwork carries him across the hazardous chamber. Landing on the far stone ledge with a heavy thud, Jake catches his breath, while Cecil hovers back to his side. Turning back toward the bubbling green lake, the blue imp glances over the gauntlet they just conquered. Panting softly as he catches his breath, Jake notes with satisfaction that the first of the 3 challenge rooms is officially cleared. A system chime alerts him immediately, updating the progress to 1 out of 3 rooms cleared, while restarting a strict 15-minute timer for the next trial. Pushing open the heavy wooden door, Jake and Cecil enter the second challenge room with renewed focus. Looking down at another vast underground expanse, Jake sighs as he sees yet another lake of green acid filled with floating stone pillars. Resting upon a glowing crystalline pedestal on the entrance ledge, an ornate dagger catches his immediate attention. Examining the weapon closely, Jake wonders why the dungeon specifically provided a dagger for this stage. Noticing the bone hilt and ritualistic engravings, he notes that the weapon gives off distinct cult-like ceremonial vibes. Reaching down to the floating pedestal, Jake firmly takes hold of the bone dagger's handle. Scanning the grid of pillars with the dagger in hand, Jake realizes there is no continuous path made solely of snake symbols, making standard jumps impossible with his lowered stats. Looking at the weapon, he deduces that if mushrooms deactivated one symbol type, this ritual dagger must be meant to neutralize another. He inspects the snake motif coiling around the crossguard, linking the dagger's design directly to the room's overarching puzzle lore. Observing the bright square rune on the nearest stone pillar, Jake prepares to test how the dagger interacts with the glowing platform mechanisms. Studying the second platform symbol, Jake questions what kind of offering a winged serpent would actually consume. Looking closely at the illustration, he realizes the only other figures depicted alongside the serpent are kneeling worshippers. Letting out a heavy sigh with a wary look on his face, Jake mutters that he really doesn't like the grim implication. Cursing the dark ritual design under his breath, Jake slices his own palm with the bone blade to draw an offering of blood. Fricking his hand outward, he splatters drops of fresh crimson blood directly across the winged serpent symbol. Cecil winces at the sight, sarcastically hoping that humans have plenty of extra blood to spare for the rest of the trial. The bloodied rune pulses with a sinister crimson glow, confirming that blood sacrifice successfully neutralizes the winged serpent platforms. Jake tightly clutches the bone hilt, grimacing through the sharp burning pain radiating from his freshly cut palm. Staring at his hand in mild disbelief, Jake wonders why such a minor cut is bleeding so excessively. Crimson droplets continuously stream down from his palm, revealing the dark, sacrificial property of the ritual blade. Hovering ahead, Cecil points out a viable path across the chamber, telling Jake that he only needs 3 consecutive jumps to reach the other side. Grimacing through the pain in his bleeding hand, Jake grits his teeth, knowing he has no choice but to keep moving forward. He raises his trembling, blood-stained palm, feeling the steady drain of vitality beginning to weaken his grip. Pushing through the fatigue, Jake charges forward and launches into a sprint toward the edge of the platform. With all the force he can muster, he leaps across the open expanse above the bubbling green acid pool. As his boot connects with the edge of the stone pillar, the smooth surface fails to give him enough traction. His foot slips violently across the blood-slicked stone, completely throwing off his balance. Jake slams hard onto the platform, cursing in frustration as his momentum skids him dangerously close to the caustic liquid. Holding up his wounded hand, Jake realizes that the bone dagger inflicted a lingering curse or debuff that is actively draining his strength. Blood continues to drip and splatter heavily across the stone floor, revealing the severe cost of using the sacrificial blade. Looking at the blood-soaked winged serpent symbol, Jake grimaces as the continuous blood loss begins to severely drain his stamina. Struggling to support his weight on trembling arms, he forces himself forward, determined not to collapse on the platform. With a desperate burst of willpower, Jake pushes off the stone pillar and leaps toward the next platform across the acid pool. Sailing through the cavern air, he descends toward the narrow stone pillar as his vision begins to blur from physical exhaustion. His boot lands hard against the stone with a solid thud, barely catching the edge of the pillar to maintain his footing. Without breaking momentum, he immediately bounds forward into another leap, refusing to let the deadly debuff slow him down. Suddenly, time seems to slow to a crawl as a violent, deafening heartbeat resonates through his entire being. A luminous white aura erupts from deep within his soul, outlines of raw, primal power flaring around his muscles mid-jump. Letting out an agonizing roar, Jake grits his teeth as fiery crimson lightning surges across his body, pushed to his absolute physical limit. Enduring the intense surge of dormant power, he prepares to stick the landing as his bloodline begins to awaken under extreme pressure. Watching Jake's trajectory fall short in midair, Cecil's eyes widen in sheer horror as he screams that Jake isn't going to make the jump. Gravity pulls Jake rapidly downward as his weakened legs fall well short of the stone platform's surface. Plummeting straight toward the bubbling caustic lake, Jake desperately stretches his arm out toward the rocky cliffside. With everything on the line, his fingers strain forward in a desperate reach for the narrow ledge above the acidic pool. Digging in with fierce desperation, his bloodied fingers securely grab hold of the ledge's lip, just inches above certain doom. Let out an agonizing cry. Jake strains with all his might against the immense downward pull of gravity and fatigue. Fresh crimson blood drips continuously down the stone wall from his wounded hand, threatening to lubricate the rock and slip his grip. Flying down frantically, Cecil claws at Jake's forearm and urgently screams for him to pull himself up before his strength gives out completely. Gritting his teeth against the searing strain in his muscles, Jake snaps back that he already knows how close he is. Clenching his jaw so hard his teeth grind together, Jake prepares to haul his dead weight up onto solid ground. Before he can pull himself fully onto the ledge, the caustic liquid splashes against his boot, hissing violently as acid dissolves through the sole. Screaming through the searing pain, Jake pulls with every ounce of raw physical strength remaining in his arms. Gritting his teeth in pure agony, veins bulge along his neck as he claws his way up the jagged stone surface. Dragging his battered body over the ledge, he crawls forward on his elbows as toxic green fumes rise from his smoking leg. Collapsing onto the cavern floor, a wave of despair washes over him as he whispers that he might not survive the trial. Looking back in horror, he sees the caustic green acid violently eating away at his lower leg and cloth. Paralyzed by the excruciating burning agony, Jake stares wide-eyed in absolute shock as cold sweat drenching his pale face. Darkness begins to creep into the edges of his fading consciousness, facing the terrifying reality of his impending death.